Hey, folks, and welcome to a brand new installment of OU Insider Live on this Wednesday evening. Parker Thune alongside Jesse Crittenden. No drum tonight. He's dealing with a migraine, or so he alleges. Hopefully, he's feeling better in the morning. But Jesse is the late fill in. Glad to have you along, my friend. We're going to dive into a lot of different things tonight. Obviously, there is plenty of new news this week. Last week was very dead on the OU football front. This week, we have a coaching staff shakeup. We have developments on the recruiting front. We have generally a vast array of topics to hit this evening. And if you want your questions answered, fire away in the chat. Again, the way that this operates every single week is you ask a question in the chat. We can't guarantee that it'll get answered because we only have so much time. But what we can guarantee is that if you make it a super chat, which is to say, if you tack on a financial contribution, we make it a point to address every single one of those, no matter how long it takes. We will get to all super chats. So you want to drop a super chat, you are more than welcome. And that is the easiest way to ensure that your question does indeed get answered over the course of the evening. Now, before we go any further, want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Manscaped. 2024 is here in full swing, and that means it's time for a New Year's resolution check-in with our friends at Manscaped. It's never too late to level up your grooming game and keep your bush tamed. Manscaped's new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good. It's the MVP of 2024, and it's not just a trimmer. It's your grooming sidekick. It's equipped with two skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. It's like having a personal stylist at your fingertips or, well, wherever you need it. And did we mention it's waterproof because a trim in the shower is the only way to start the day. And for any men who want the full grooming experience, look no further than Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0. In this grooming kit, you get the trusted lawnmower, Manscaped's ear and nose hair trimmer, and essential aftercare products with the Crop Soother Ball Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant. As a gesture for the new year, the good folks at Manscaped have even thrown in two free gifts, the Boxers 2.0 and the Shed 2.0 toiletry bag, because they know good and well you're still rocking your boxers from high school. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code OU Insider at manscaped.com. Embrace a new you and definitely embrace a new trimmer courtesy of Manscaped. And folks, as we get ready to dive into the discussion, here's what I will tell you up front. We're going to cover a lot of ground over the course of the next hour. We will talk coaching staff. We will talk winter workouts. We will talk recruiting. However, this is a drop in the bucket compared to all the information and insider intel that you're going to get as a subscriber on OUinsider.com, which is just going to cost you $8 a month. What I recommend to anybody out there that's a little bit tentative about making that investment, grab a 1-month subscription for $9.95. You don't like it, you don't have to stick around, but I feel confident, as do we all, that you're going to see it as worth your investment because we keep you fed with steady insider information year round. Even now, in a very dead portion of the offseason, we have you covered with daily updates on everything going on behind the scenes, not just on the gridiron, but on the hardwood with men's basketball. Jesse's done a great job covering softball. Our man, Ronnie Crimson, has you covered on all things Sooner baseball as they get started. Their season is just 4 games old, but should be a banner year for Skip Johnson and the boys. So real easy way to stay up to date with everything that's going on beyond what you can see on your TV screen when those teams play is to go subscribe over at OUinsider.com. With that, I'm going to keep an eye here on the chat. And so as you have questions, please fire them away. We'll get to them. But for the moment, I guess, Jesse, let's start with the staff shakeup. No more Lee Davis. It has been the case for several weeks now. No more J.R. Sandlin as of, Monday? So the Sooners looking to fill 2 key recruiting roles internally.
Yeah, and I think this was crucial. I mean, obviously with Oklahoma going into the SEC and real I mean the reality, and you know this better than anybody, you know this better than I do. I mean, J.R. Sandlin and Lee Davis both have had a huge impact on recruiting the last couple of years. I think they've played a big role in how well OU has done on the recruiting trail the last couple of years. So I don't know. I mean, I think they're higher on Monday to get somebody that has a ton of experience to, I mean, not only at USC but most recently with the Chargers. I think it's a hire they're excited about, and it was a role they needed to fill with Lee Davis leaving. But I think, for all this to happen within the course of a day, it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and with OU going to the SEC, these are roles that don't get a lot of publicity, excuse me, but they have a big impact on what goes on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And you're 100% correct. Lee Davis and J.R. Sandlin were critical as far as keeping the keeping the operation running smoothly and continuously from a recruiting perspective for Oklahoma. That said, I said it on the Under the Visor podcast earlier today. I'll reiterate it again here. The work they did was valuable and they did it at a high level. But as with pretty much any cog in the system, save obviously for Brent Venables, right? They are replaceable. And maybe it's difficult to find somebody on their level in terms of their excellence as individuals. And I think you see that illustrated in the jobs that they got, right? Both of them left Oklahoma to go be assistant ADs at Power Five institutions. So that speaks highly of what they brought to the table. But one of the things about being at a place like the University of Oklahoma is you're always going to have people lining up and beating down the door to be a part of such a traditionally historic program in college football and one that is so nationally revered. So the hire of Jolie Ale is going to be a good one for Oklahoma. She is young, exuberant, knows the game, very much fits the bill of what Oklahoma was looking for in that role. And then it's as of yet unclear who's going to replace J.R. Sandlin. Obviously, that one's pretty fresh. As we mentioned, there had kind of been a thought for quite a while behind the scenes that Sandlin was going to leave. It was just a matter of where for. And so this was maybe something that Oklahoma did anticipate a little bit more so than Lee Davis leaving, for instance. But nevertheless, you'd still expect Oklahoma to do their due diligence and interview a great variety of candidates before they proceed with whoever the hire may be. And your hire may very well be in house. Drew Hill was previously the director of player personnel under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. He kind of shifted into a different, more specialized role uh, in the Venables era. It was real interesting because he technically held the title of director of player personnel for the offensive side of the ball. JP Lossman held that title on the defensive side of the ball. And then you had J.R. Sandlin as the director of player personnel and recruiting. So you had three DPPs to a certain extent. I mean, probably more than you need. But again, with how much energy and effort is expended in the recruiting game, I don't think there's ever a case of too many cooks in the kitchen. And so Sandlin's role, I would say the likelihood is that if Drew Hill wants that promotion, if he wants the step up to DPP and director of recruiting, whatever that joint role that Sandlin was occupying is, if he wants that promotion, which if you listen to the podcast earlier, you know that might not be the case. That's fine. He has a secure role with the offensive staff as it is. But if he wants that promotion, there's a good chance that job will be his. And then it just kind of becomes a trickle down effect, right? Who replaces Drew Hill in that role, specifically evaluating the offensive recruits and building the board out and constantly communicating with the on-field staff as to who they want to prioritize and who they like. And Drew Hill is very well respected, not just at Oklahoma, but nationally for his eye for talent. Again, I there have been so many times over the years where just out of curiosity, I have asked sources in and around the Switzer Center, hey, like how was it that OU came upon this kid? How did they take note of him? I remember asking this question about Grant Bricks because OU was like the fifth school to offer a kid from small town Iowa. And I wondered how on earth did they dig this kid up? He was completely unranked and hardly noticed when they offered him. And the word I got was, "Yep, that's a Drew Hill special." Drew Hill dug that one up, and so yeah, he's as good as they come. Definitely a valuable cog in the machine for Oklahoma. And regardless of whether he gets the quote unquote promotion or remains in his current role, definitely somebody that provides a lot more value than most realize to the Oklahoma football program. Beyond that, Jesse, I think our subscribers at OUinsider.com are aware, and I don't have clearance to go public with it yet, but our subscribers at OUinsider.com are aware that there is a leader in the clubhouse for the special teams coordinator role or special teams analyst. Not sure exactly what the title is going to be, but the role formerly occupied by Jay Nunez is on the verge of being filled at Oklahoma. So if you're a subscriber, you know exactly who I'm talking about. If you're not, boom, there's your incentive to sign up. Exclusive information right there. So that is another role on staff that is expected to be filled very soon here. And Jesse, I'd love your angle on this, because when Nunez announced his departure, or I guess he didn't really announce it. Actually, we announced it. We reported it that Jay Nunez was going to be leaving Oklahoma for Alabama, and so regardless of how it happened, when that announcement was made, fans were not all that sad to see Jay Nunez go, because I think they looked at the performance of Oklahoma's special teams units in 2023 and concluded, well, pretty much anybody they bring in is going to be an upgrade over what Oklahoma did in the special teams department last season. And it's not fair, I don't think, to hang all of that on Jay Nunez, but as Oklahoma as Oklahoma kind of moves forward with their new special teams coordinator slash analyst, what do you think the emphasis needs to be in that aspect of the operation for OU?
Yeah, I think there just needs to be consistency. And you're right. It's one of those things, like it's hard to blame Jay Nunez too much for some of the mistakes. I mean, he didn't cause Gavin Freeman to muff several punts this season. He was not the one kicking for Zach Schmidt when he missed several kicks, especially in the middle of the season. But at the same time, there was a lack of cohesion. There's been a lack of cohesion, and I think also a lack of particular focus when it comes to special teams. And I think special teams is one of those things where you don't really think about it until it bites you, right? That's kind of how special teams is seen a lot of the time. And I think if you're Oklahoma, really the last couple of years, there haven't been a lot of moments where special teams has had a huge impact in helping you win a game. It's had a huge impact in helping you lose a game.
Good
And
call.
so more than one. So I think there just needs to, I think the idea of hiring somebody like you mentioned, I think people, fans, OU Insider subscribers already know. I think having a guy with an extensive background in special teams, to put a little bit more focus and a little bit more intensity into special teams. I think OU needs to be able to shake things up and make plays. I think there's too often been a focus on playing things too safe. I think there needs to be more of an effort to make special teams plays happen. And I think the other thing too is, and I got this from talking to people I mean, for a few weeks ago, that I think that's been both a public and private frustration for the coaching staff and for people around the program, is how much special teams has hurt OU. And I don't know, I got this impression when I was talking to people about Zach Alley, that Zach Alley actually has a background in helping with special teams too. And I think that
Yep.
actually was part of why it wasn't the main reason why he was hired by any means, but I
Certainly.
actually I think he's going to help a little bit in that regard too. So all that is to say, I think these are all directions pointing in the right way, that OU is taking special teams a little bit more seriously than they have the last couple of years.
Yeah, and we know under the old staff, right, during the Lincoln Riley era, special teams was not a priority at all.
Now,
Once Shane Beamer left, there was little to no attention paid to special teams. And so, for as little attention as it received over the first, 4 years of Riley's tenure, that last year, 2021, man, it was a debacle, and everybody could see it. right? And so, spoiler, like I will say this about the guy that Oklahoma is expected to hire. If and when this comes to fruition, it's a really good hire, really good. And it's one that OU fans are going to be pleased with. But you're exactly right, Jesse. When was the last time special teams very obviously contributed to an Oklahoma win? You got to go back years, man. Years. It has been a long, maybe 2019. Maybe 2019.
Maybe, but it all gets clouded by the amount of time special teams has hurt them this year. The only thing I can think of is maybe Iowa State last year, the fake punt touchdown.
Yeah.
Maybe. If you want to be, if you really want to, if you really want to look for something, they probably still win that game without it. But think about all the missed kicks and the special teams miscues OU has had the last several years. And again, just the lack of impactful plays. There's a lack of consistency in terms of execution and a lack of impactful plays. It's a twofer in negativity.
Yeah, and look, Oklahoma's got to get better in the kicking department, right? Zach Schmidt was just 15 for 21 last year. That's not going to fly at a place like OU, not for long anyway. And Oklahoma really didn't have a viable alternative last year because Gavin Marshall wasn't healthy and Reddy Mustafara was just not well. It, to quote that meme or that video that made the rounds on the internet, he was not that guy. And as much as Zach Schmidt struggled, there was really nobody better to throw in that situation. Now that's not going to be the case for OU in 2024. They brought in Tyler Keltner, the Florida State transfer, to compete for that job. Marshall is healthy at this point, and then you have Liam Evans, the true freshman from right up the road in Moore, and that is a guy that is coming in. And I guess I'll just put it this way: it would not shock me if he is kicking off the bat for Oklahoma. He's very sharp, even being a youngster. There's a reason why he was one of the most coveted kickers in the nation. OU really pulled off a coup being able to snag him as a preferred walk on because I think he very well might have ended up with some scholarships if that recruitment process had dragged out any longer. But he committed back in Oklahoma, back in August to Oklahoma. Oklahoma was kind of always where his heart was at. And so the Sooners got a really good one in that kid and somebody who's going to come in and at the very least provide a legitimate competitive push right from the jump for the older guys in the room because Keldner hasn't kicked, at least not on a regular basis, in 2 years. He was the starter at East Tennessee State, but I think he only attempted one extra point last year at FSU. He was not the first stringer. And so there's big question mark there. I think he's a career 74% guy, which is even lower than Schmidt. And so that raises some obvious questions, right? Do you have anybody that you know you can count on at kicker? The answer for Oklahoma is, well, very obviously no, because even as good as Liam Evans is, right, and as good as he was at the high school level, he's a freshman. He's brand new. He's green. And so there is no clearly quantified variable in that group. Now, I think the Sooners found a very convenient answer and honestly, a very necessary answer at punter midway through the season in Luke Elzinga. And I think once we all saw that guy, Jesse, we were like, why on earth was Josh Plaster handling the punting duties for the first half of the season? But that's one aspect of special teams, along with the long snapper, Ben Anderson. Those are two areas that you just don't have to worry.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And actually, I mean, Brent Venables was asked about that after Luke Elsinga came in halfway through. Why has this guy been on the bench the entire game? He genuinely, Parker, Luke Elzinga over the second half of the season was one of the best punters in the country. And not only just in terms of, I mean, he averaged over 45 yards per punt. I mean, he had 6 punts with of 50 yards or more, but he was consistently flipping the field and giving Oklahoma an edge. And again, that's one of those special teams things you don't really think about until you don't have it. And being able to flip field position and being able to pin opponents deep, Luke Elzinga was able to do that. So I think I'm glad you mentioned that because in a year that's going to be full of questions heading in the SEC. What does the offensive line look like? Jackson Arnold's first year as the starter. What is all this going to look like? These kickers. I think Luke Elzing at the very least, and Ben Anderson. Those are guys that OU fans should be confident in. And to me, Parker, I think you would like the kicking spot. You would obviously like that to be a little bit more short up. You would like it to be a little bit more certain. You'd like to have a little bit more confidence in it. But I think the fact that they're bringing in so many guys is at least an acknowledgement that what has been happening the last 2 years is not good enough and they need to fix it. So again, I think it's all under the guise of trying to improve special teams, which has really struggled the last couple of years.
Yeah, and once again, this expected hire is really good enough that I halfway wonder, like it makes me think, well, shoot, why didn't Alabama call this guy before Jay Nunez? And that's no knock on Jay Nunez. I'm just like, wow, this is an impressive resume, a very impressive one. Now, uh, in the return game, Gavin Freeman had those muffs. He was plagued by them over the latter half of the season, fell out of favor with the fan base. And look, that kind of thing is fixable, right? Gavin Freeman is not a lost cause as a punt returner. There's a reason the staff trusted him to be back there in the first place. That's a hard thing to do, is return punts. One of the hardest things to do in the sport of football. And as we saw with Jaden Gibson last year, right? If you have a mental block more so than a physical issue, then that's something that can be easily remedied over time. And I think that will come for Gavin Freeman. What I would like to see in the kick return game, though, and I think there will be plenty of fans that share this perspective, Jesse, is you just like to see somebody with a bit more explosiveness and a bit more potential to break one. Oklahoma hasn't had a kick return for a touchdown since 2016. That was Joe Mixon in the Ohio State game in Norman. And when it comes to punt return, man, you really don't care, right? As long as the guy catches the ball and doesn't muff it, doesn't cause a turnover, as long as he catches the ball and is smart about which ones to field, which ones to let bounce, so as to provide you with ideal field position one way or another. That's about all you want from a punt returner. If he can pop one off every now and again, that's fine. But you just want stability in the punt return game more so than anything. I think it's fair to expect that whoever's returning kicks has some breakaway ability. And the guys that Oklahoma has used in the kick return game the last few years just haven't really demonstrated that potential. Jalil Farouk did rip off a long one against Tulsa to start off the Sooners' third non-conference game of the year in September, Jesse, but then he fumbled at the end of it. So that kind of put a damper on him.
Yeah, and look, you're right. I mean, you really just want consistency and someone to be solid at punt returner. But Parker, I really think that's hurt Oklahoma, a lack of explosiveness in the punt return game, really the last few years. But I mean, you even look at last year, and again, it's not to pile too much on Gavin Freeman, but he had the 82-yard touchdown in the season opener. The rest of the year, 17 attempts for 40 yards. So it's again like, yeah, it's just not great. And so not only it was the consistency and just being able to consistently catch and get punts that way, but there wasn't a lot of explosiveness either. Kickoff is an interesting thing, Parker. I don't know how you feel about this, but like I think there aren't very many kickoffs that are happening really at any level of football now, especially the NFL or college football. Kickoff returns just aren't the kickoff returns across the board are down as rules have incentivized teams to either, let it go back into the back of the end zone or whatever. I mean, OU had 21 kick returns last year.
Yeah,
21.
and that sucked. And I hate that trend in football. There are a lot of trends in football that I hate, but that's one of them, man. And I get that it's a safety thing or whatever, but you made so many advancements in recent years when it comes to player safety, whether it's the improved helmet technology or not letting the gunners on the kickoff unit take a running start. I feel as though the powers that be have almost taken too much out of football, at least as it pertains to kick return. And that's again, Jesse, why I bring up the fact that whoever you have back there, you would like them to be able to break one off, because who knows how many you're actually going to have the chance to return. And so when you're only getting 20 of those opportunities a year and you have you have 40 yards of clear field in front of you on a kick return, as opposed to maybe 5 or 10 on a punt return. You'd like to be able to maximize what you get out of those return opportunities. And that's certainly an area in which Oklahoma could stand to improve. Now, from special teams to winter workouts. I mean, look, that's what's going on right now, folks. Spring ball is still several weeks away. So workouts, that's really all we have to go off. They won't tell you everything, but they'll certainly tell you something about who's got it and who doesn't, and who's taking it seriously and who's not this early in the process. And Jesse, I will say this: the freshman class, all in all, from everything I've heard, has come in and been really impressive. And that's not a shock, because Venables and his staff have hit on so many evals through their first 2 years that you've just kind of come to expect the vast majority of guys, when they show up on campus as true freshmen, they're at least going to be ready to compete. I mean, I don't think you need more than two hands to count the number of guys that Venables and his staff have recruited through their 3 cycles now at Oklahoma that have just been non-factors. And so it's encouraging to hear such things about the freshmen, but even so, with this group being the first group that never tastes Big 12 action, and they are the first SEC class in many ways. Great to know that all the guys that you brought in, and we'll get to some more specifics and some individual names, but just great to know in a general sense that all those guys that you brought in, at least from the early impressions, the early returns, are living up to the billing.
So much hinges on this freshman class, almost to an unfair degree. Like it's almost unfair to them how unique and also how important this particular freshman group is, really in the context of Oklahoma as a football program. I mean, with the SEC move coming, with the transfer portal continuing to be such a big thing in football and collegiate athletics as a whole, Parker, I mean, I think you would agree. OU is going to need some of these guys to step in next year and play snaps, like play real significant snaps, probably on both sides of the ball. And that's a really tough place to be if you're these freshmen having to go into the program's first year in the SEC and make real contributions. But Parker, when you especially you look at the offensive line, or really both lines of scrimmage, and really I think there's almost every position group you could look at and say, man, they need guys to make an impact there. I think, look, this freshman class is highly touted. It's one of the best that OU has seen in a long time. I think there's every reason to be excited about them. And as you mentioned, it's good that there's positive reports coming out of winter workouts. But it's weird because you want them to be able to get settled in like a normal class. But again, the reality is there's a lot hinging on this freshman class. So it's what's happening right now is important. The next several months is crucial to developing these freshmen.
Now, David Stone and Jaden Jackson, to no one's surprise, have been highly impressive based on the sources I've spoken with. And I will say they've been impressive enough that you may see a portal entry at defensive tackle in the next couple of months. I don't know what the timetable would be on that, but they there are going to be a lot of guys on the chopping block. That's just the reality, because OU they're 10 over the scholarship limit right now. And they would love to add another piece or two via the portal. And so you do the math, you got to start. It's harsh, but you got to start letting some guys go. You're going to have to start processing dudes this spring, and it's going to happen. And there will be guys and some good football players with bright futures ahead of them that don't get the opportunity to continue at Oklahoma because there simply isn't room right now. And so, again, though, if you're letting experienced guys walk in the transfer portal, it's because you're very confident in what you have in your freshman class coming in and how highly you think of some of those individuals. And David Stone, I mean, he was the #1 defensive player in the nation in the 2024 cycle, right? You expected that dude was going to come in and make waves, and he has. And Jaden Jackson is regarded as one of the most criminally underrated guys in the entire 2024 cycle. He was the #10 defensive tackle in the nation, according to our folks at Rivals. So, again, one of those dudes that you expect to come in and make stuff happen. and he certainly has. Reggie Powers, who was a late eval, a late take for Oklahoma in the 2024 cycle after he decommitted from Michigan State. The word has been he is that dude. And the same is true for Michael Boganowski, who was another guy that the Sooners didn't get committed until pretty late in the process. That one dragged all the way into late October before they got him on board, beating out K-State for his pledge. But those two dudes, man, they are both sizable safeties. Powers is 6'1", 200. Boganowski is 6'2", 205. Those are SEC safeties right there. And when they're showing up and they're turning heads in workouts right from the get-go, man, that gets you so excited about the future for Brandon Hall's room. And Brandon Hall just has an embarrassment of riches in his position group. I mean, you think about not only Peyton Bowen and Billy Bowman, the two guys that are kind of expected to head it up, but you got Robert Spears Jennings in the mix. Jaden Hardy, another true freshman that I think is going to play some very good football at OU before all is said and done. Eric McCarty really hasn't gotten a chance to touch the field yet, but he's a stud in his own right. And so that safety room is chock full right now for Oklahoma. Chock full. There's a lot to like about where the depth in that room sits. Is there an argument to be made, Jesse, that heading into next season, safety might be pound for pound the best position group Oklahoma has?
Yes, there's absolutely an argument. At the very minimum, defensively, it's probably has the most depth and potential star power than any other group. But yeah, I mean, you just mentioned it. I think, and I think we saw that. I think we saw that bear out as the year went on last year. Now the defense had some issues now and then down the stretch, and that bowl game wasn't the best performance for the defense as a whole. But I mean, Peyton Bowen's going to be a stud. He just is, and getting Billy Bowman to return for another year is huge. But I think there's still really untapped potential in that room. I still think Robert Spears Jennings can have a huge, huge impact. I really, Parker, I think that secondary as a whole, I'm really excited about the secondary as a whole. I mean, with other guys like Makari Vickers and Josiah Wagner and Jacoby Johnson, I think there's some freshmen in this group that can really add to that too. So I actually think if you were to ask me what position group I feel most comfortable with, it's probably safety. And just because I think Billy Bowman and Peyton Bowen are going to be as good of a duo as almost anywhere you can find in college football.
Yeah, and I think the greatest testament to how good those two are and will be in tandem is that if you had told me last year at this time that Robert Spears Jennings would not be a projected starter going into 2024 for Oklahoma, I would have told you there is not a snowball's chance in hell, right? Because the best case scenario, like the only thing that could prevent that was Billy Bowman comes back for his senior year. Okay, you check that box. And Peyton Bowen is not only as advertised, but even better. Check that box as well. Robert Spears Jennings is a dang good football player and a guy that could and I believe will be an NFL draft pick one day. So the fact that that is your third safety this fall as things stand right now, I mean, that is a pretty ideal position to be in. And similarly, I mean, you look at the rest of the secondary. Woody Washington is probably going to bounce around a little bit. He's not just going to be a corner. I think you'll see him some at Cheetah. Des Malone, the San Diego State transfer, enters the mix. Makari Vickers, Josiah Wagner, Jacoby Johnson, they all got meaningful snaps as freshmen. I think Jay Valai did a great job preparing those dudes for what's ahead of them in the limited action that they saw off the bat in 2023. And how about another freshman that's turning heads? Eli Bowen, Peyton's younger brother. And there is this connotation, there's this assumption, this stigma, and I don't know where it comes from. I guess because he's short, he's only 5'9", but there is a segment of the fan base that believes adamantly that the only reason that dude's on scholarship at the University of Oklahoma is because his older brother is Peyton Bowen. Folks, I'm just here to tell you, Eli is an outstanding ball player in his own right. and you look at all the offers that he had to go play college football elsewhere, those offers weren't all because of Peyton. Eli Bowen holds the single season interceptions record at Denton Guyer High School, and he set it as a sophomore. He picked off 10 passes that year. And most anyone will tell you, anyone that's watched those two play for any amount of time will tell you, Eli's ball skills are actually better than Peyton's. He is not quite as fast. He is not quite as good with the ball in his hands, but again, he plays defensive back. He doesn't really need to be. Peyton's more of a threat in the return game and has more of a well-rounded nature to his game. But for what Eli is, and he's going to be a cornerback at Oklahoma, he has elite potential, a truly unlimited ceiling, just like his brother. And it is absolutely not the case that Oklahoma was only interested in bringing on Eli for his brother's sake. In fact, I have it on very good authority from the source as good as it gets that if Peyton Bowen had faxed in his NLI properly and ended up an Oregon Duck, it absolutely would not have mattered because the Sooners would still have pushed for Eli Bowen just as hard as any of their targets at defensive back in the 2024 cycle. And early on, some of his testing numbers have been ridiculous. Eli Bowen's already one of the fastest guys on the team. Peyton, I think, I'm fairly certain Peyton was top 3 across the, and you know what? He might have actually been the fastest on the entire defensive side of the ball. Peyton Bowen's really fast. Eli Bowen is a tick slower, but when you're a tick slower than top 3 on the team as far as speed goes, that's still going to play. That'll fly. And I don't know how much Eli Bowen sees the field in year one. I think best case scenario, honestly, Jesse, is kind of the Wagner, Vickers, Jacoby Johnson plan that we saw in 2023, where you rotate him in for a drive here, a drive there, maybe 1 or 2 possessions a game, just to make sure they're staying warm and seeing some stuff and being able to learn experientially. But that's not a guy that, for the sake of his own development and also for the sake of your depth at cornerback, you don't necessarily want to see Eli Bowen on the field a ton in 2024. If you do, that's great because that means he's good enough to have beaten out numerous football players that are older and more experienced than him. But if you don't see him a ton, that means that your sophomores all took a jump. They all proved that they're ready and capable of handling whatever you hand to them. And also that your 2 seasoned veterans in Woody Washington and Des Malone are holding their own as well.
That's going to be the one thing I think for the secondary, Parker, is if guys don't get on the field, I don't think you can assume it's an indictment on their performances or the way they've looked. It's that OU has a ton of depth at corner and safety, and it's not only just a ton of depth, but when you look at the top of the safety room again with Billy Bowman and Peyton Bowen, then you look at the cornerback room with Woody Washington and Gentry Williams, who, if he's healthy, is going to play a lot. There's just not a ton of snaps in a given game to get 5, 6, 7 guys a ton of snaps, even 3 or 4. Really, there's not always a ton. So that's why I mean, I think early in the season is going to be important, really, for that secondary group in general. But I just don't think Brent Venables and this coaching staff is in the business of offering a very valuable scholarship spot to somebody just because their older brother plays on the team. I don't think that's the way they want to go about doing things. Because scholarship spots, especially in the transfer portal era, Parker, you can't just give out a scholarship spot. You
cannot.
You can't just afford to give one out. And I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about his potential. And if he makes waves, it's in that secondary. That's a credit to him because there's a ton of guys that deserve playing time in that secondary.
And man, like it again, assuming Gentry Williams is 100% healthy and stays that way over the course of the season, there's nobody in that cornerback room that has a higher ceiling than Gentry Williams, at least not right now, looking ahead to 2024 specifically. If he's at the top of his game, he'll be in contention for all SEC honors. That's how good that dude is. And you saw it in spurts, you saw it in flashes last year. He's such a well-rounded defender And especially when he was asked to come downhill and defend the run, you saw him make some really special plays at times. But as he continues to get even more comfortable and even sharper in coverage, he's just going to unlock a whole new dimension to his game. And that'll be exciting to see. And hopefully, I think you should be able to get him back for his senior year in 2025. It would take a real special junior year, the likes of what we saw from Billy Bowman for early draft entry to even be a consideration. But I guess what I'm saying is Gentry is that good to the point where that type of season this fall is actually feasible. Like there's a world in which that is a conversation come the winter.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's got to be music to the ears of OU fans everywhere. And again, I think you need Oklahoma needs a lot of things to go right. They need a lot of things to go right. And I mean, they need this freshman class. They need some of these guys to hit and make an impact. They need guys like Gentry Williams to stay healthy and, for this team to reach its potential. Parker, I wanted to ask you, are you hearing, I think we've, whether it's freshmen or particularly, underclassmen, second year guys or third year guys that didn't see a ton of playing time. Are there any names that you're hearing that stand out right now?
Man, I guess so. This brings us back around to the offensive side of the ball because it's such a crowded room at wide receiver, and guys are going to have to fight so hard for snaps. I mean, you are five deep right off the bat with guys that were major contributors last year, whether at Oklahoma or elsewhere, in Andrell Anthony, Deion Burks, Nick Anderson, Jalil Farouk, and Jaden Gibson. All those five made plenty of plays last year. Four of them at Oklahoma, and obviously Burks at Purdue. But I think Burks is a starter next year. I think he projects immediately into the lineup. But then a guy that continues to just wow everybody. And Jackson Arnold had some very encouraging comments about him earlier this week in his interview, man, is Brennan Thompson, because he's just like, and it's very straightforward. Like there's not a lot of nuance to it. He's just really freaking fast.
They got to find ways to get him on the field more, man. They just do. And again, that's going to be so hard in a loaded wide receiver group where you have not only young, exciting underclassmen and exciting new guys and veterans, but Brennan Thompson makes plays, man, especially towards the end of the year. I don't know if there's anybody that can defend him one on one.
Well,
Really don't.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like he gets a step on anybody, it's over. There's nobody in college football that's going stride for stride with him, at least nobody that plays defensive back. And I think that, the obvious liability with him is he's small.
He is.
5'9", 160 pounds. And I saw some back and forth in the live Q&A or in the comments section earlier about rolling him out as a kick returner and the feasibility of that given his perceived durability concerns. Like, do you really want a guy, you really want 10 guys, 10 bodies flying at a dude who's already that small? And I guess my rejoinder to that would be how often on a kickoff return is a guy going to get straight up squared up like that? Like how often is he going to take a direct shot, especially when Brennan Thompson is as shifty and as fast as he is? So I don't really worry about him. If you decide to use him as a kick returner, I think that'd be great for Oklahoma. I think they should. But I think where you start to have concerns is, for instance, he was at his best this past season. No particular secret. He was at his best when he was just running straight down the field. And that's pretty much all they had him do, right? When he came in the game, he was stretching the field. Everybody knew it until that final game in the Alamo Bowl where he beats his man deep for a 63-yard touchdown. Jackson Arnold lays out a perfect ball to him. But then later in the game, they had him run what was, maybe a 10, 12-yard comebacker. And he gets the catch and passes a little bit high from Jackson Arnold. And so he has to go up, and the defenders kind of converge on him as he's still airborne. And he takes a shot, loses the ball. It was ruled a fumble, then overturned. But he was woozy, didn't play again for the rest of the game. Very obviously, at least semi-concussed. But if you're putting a guy in situations like that where, he's operating over the middle of the field and you expect that he's going to take a shot, okay, that's where the durability conversation comes into play. But if all he's ever doing is just running streaks and skinny posts and generally stretching the field for the quarterback, there is no harm in using Brennan Thompson and using him a lot. If that guy is on the field for 15 snaps a game next year, with how much depth Oklahoma has at wide receiver elsewhere, you're going to be able to have threats all across the perimeter, regardless of who you roll out there at wideout. But especially when he is on the field, man, he's going to create so many nightmares for the opposition, because not only do you have to pay attention to him beating deep, but the very fact that you have to account for that means that you're going to have a weakness somewhere else, right? And that's something that Jackson Arnold is going to be able to exploit. So, man, I've heard some very good things about Brennan Thompson and how he has continued to approach the off season and just build that rapport with Arnold. And again, I think he's a guy that should be able to contribute much more next year than he did this year. And I know opportunities will be at a premium. I think he's a 20-25 catch guy next season. And with those 20-25 catches, the majority of them will likely be big, big plays.
You know how many, just off the top of your head, I'm curious because I actually just looked this up myself because I was curious about how much he actually played last year. Do you
7
know off the
catches.
top, do you know off the top of your head how many snaps he played in 2023?
Snaps, I don't. If I had to ballpark it, I would probably say 50 or 60 at most. It was not that many.
30.
His 30?
30.
I was about to say, yeah, his ratio of targets to snaps was probably pretty high because, when he was in the game, like they were looking to go his way.
30 snaps, and he had 11 targets and 30 snaps.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yep, again.
And also, it's a very small number of snaps. So it's very, very small, but he actually finished with the highest offensive grade per Pro Football Focus, which is not gospel. It is not a perfect system, but he made plays when he was on the field. And
yeah,
I mean,
Jimmy Satterfield threw in a comment on the YouTube and said, and brought up the fact that Jacquez Petaway is fast as well. Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with Petaway too, man, because again, he's one of those guys where, like, going into the year, or at least going into the spring, he's no higher than 7th on the depth chart, which is wild because he was a top 100 recruit just 1 year ago and led the team in receptions in his very first collegiate game. So clearly that is a dude with immense potential to contribute. But even so, you wonder how many opportunities can you reasonably make for that guy? I have a hard time believing any of the true freshmen in that wide receiver room make a meaningful contribution next year. And it's not because they're not good enough. It's just because Emmett Jones's group is so talent rich, Jesse.
yeah, I mean, think about it. Jaden Gibson last year. You know how many catches Jaden Gibson had? 14.
Yeah.
There's just, and even I think a guy that everybody was impressed with last year when he was on the field, he didn't average more than 17 snaps a game last year. And now you're adding more depth. Now you're losing Drake Stoops, but now you're adding more depth. And there's already young guys on the roster that probably deserve a bigger shot. That slot receiver spot, Parker, I don't know about you, but I actually think that's one of the most intriguing things I'm looking at in the spring, because whether it's Burks or Petaway or Brennan Thompson or anybody else I'm forgetting to mention, you're losing your number one guy in Drake Stoops. He was the number one option for this offense, especially after Angelo Anthony went out. There's not only big shoes to fill, but a ton of snaps to fill too. And I think there's a lot of quality guys who could fill that. There hasn't been a ton of talk about, yes, about replacing Drake, but also how they handle that slot receiver position. Jaquays Petaway is a guy that, certainly should be in the mix.
I think you can expect to see Deion Burks get the bulk of those snaps, but Petaway will certainly be in the mix. Gavin Freeman will certainly be in the mix. I guess there's a world where maybe once in a blue moon you see Zion Raggins on the field just as a gadget guy because he is so electric. Other than that, he's probably the only freshman. I guess maybe if you have a Sequoia National Park package for the red zone. You can throw Ivan Carrion out there opposite Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson and just have trees to throw the fade balls to. But that's about the only circumstance in which you can see freshmen getting used at wide receiver. Somebody asked in the chat which defensive backs red shirt. I will bet you Jaden Hardy red shirts. And again, not because he's not good enough, but just because there is so much depth at that safety position. I think you can probably expect Michael Patterson McDonald to redshirt too. At cornerback, I think the best case scenario would be that everybody redshirts. Eli Bowen redshirts, Jeremiah Newcomb redshirts, and Devon Jordan redshirts. If one of those three plays, it's tough. It's neck and neck for me between Newcomb and Bowen as to which one would play year one. But again, you have absolutely no fewer than 6 cornerbacks that are ahead of those young guys between Woody Washington, Des Malone, Gentry Williams, and then Vickers, Wagner, Jacoby Johnson. I don't know if Kenai Walker's still around. I'll be candid with you. But yeah, I think the best case scenario is that you don't see any of those freshmen because that means you can count on the guys that have played ball before. Let's see what else we have in the chat. And one of the, oh gosh, as if I'm going to answer this question. CW Long asked, Parker, who is not working out to snuff in the workouts? There's a 0% chance I would tell you guys. 0% chance. And look, obviously not all of what we're hearing is great stuff. Yes, we get told negative information as well. We get told, oh, this guy's kind of dogging it, or this guy showed up later. Like it happens, right? Let's not act like it doesn't. It happens for every single program in the country. Not every single one of the 85 guys is going to be he's not going to have the coaching staff and the strength staff oohing and eyeing over what he's doing in winter workouts. It's just not reality. But that is one thing that I'm never going to talk about. And Brandon will not talk about it. Jesse will not talk about it until there's a legitimate reason to bring it up. It's just not something we're going to talk about because I know how fans operate. I know how fans react to things, and fans are eager enough to write off a guy like Jaden Gibson for stuff that they do see, i.e. all the drops that he had in 2022 and then in the spring game in 2023. I don't want to give fans any reason to write a guy off based on things that they haven't seen yet. So, CW Long, I appreciate the question. Never going to answer it. Will never get answered here. Let's see what else. Mark Riles asks, what about the linebacker room? Well, it's a pretty straightforward situation. I think you have Danny Stutzman coming back, which is miraculous, man. Like how good is that going? How good is that dude going to be as a senior in college? You bring back Jaron Kanek, who's got plenty of starting experience. You bring back Dasan McCullough, who's got plenty of experience. I think you could see Dasan McCullough more at the will this upcoming season, just because I think the Sooners will want to be a little bit more athletic at times at the cheetah spot. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the observation that I mentioned earlier that Reggie Powers has just been a revelation. And between Powers and Omasigo and Kendall Dolby coming back, the Sooners have a myriad of options in terms of versatile defenders that they can roll out at that cheetah spot. And Dasan, he's big. He's a good, like very impressive physical specimen. But the reality is he's just not as athletic as some of those other guys that you could have out there at the cheetah. So he's still going to play a lot, but I think you could see him bounce to a more traditional linebacker spot circumstantially as well. I think James Nestor redshirts. I don't think you see a ton of Taylor Heim. I don't think you see a ton of Phil Picciotti either. I mean, beyond Stutzman and Kanek and McCullough, obviously you have Kobe McKenzie and Kip Lewis. And it's kind of hard not to give Lewis the edge over Kanek based on what we saw down the stretch in 2023. So I think your 2 starters at linebacker could very well, and will very well be Stutzman and Lewis to kick off the year. But I think you're gonna see a good bit of rotation. Obviously, Stutzman's not coming off the field unless he has to, but you'll see Kobe McKenzie get snaps. You'll see Canick get plenty of snaps. Maybe Phil Picciotti has a very sporadic rotational role, but again, like and it's no knock on Phil Picciotti at all. There are so many groups right now across the board for this team where you can say in honesty and transparency, it's just too deep for XYZ player to legitimately make a dent, no matter how good they are. And that the one major area of concern is the offensive line, Jesse, and we've talked about that, and we'll continue to talk about that. But there's so much depth everywhere else, man, and that's one thing that's I think that ought to have fans excited.
The whole linebacker discussion, as much as they have options and they have exciting options, this whole discussion is different if Danny Stutzman isn't coming back. There would be such a panic button being pressed if Danny Stutzman wasn't coming back. But that helps not only for a veteran presence, but he's going to soak up a ton of snaps. Parker, I'm curious because I mean we saw at the end of the year, especially as Canick's play went up and down and mostly down. But even in that Alamo Bowl, which it's hard to know how much stock to really put it into an Alamo Bowl. I mean, Kip Lewis and Jaron Canick played about the same number of snaps, and I actually thought Canick played decently in that bowl game. And Kobe McKenzie got some run down the stretch, but didn't really play in the Alamo Bowl. I think you're right. I think it's going to be Stutzman and Lewis, but I do wonder if Lewis seizes control of it during the offseason, if Canick gets more of an edge during the offseason. I do think that is going to be something interesting to watch is how do the snaps shake out next to Stutzman. I do think that's an interesting thing to think about.
Ola Kyle dropped a super chat with $5 and said players are now getting paid 6 and 7 figures annually. Wouldn't the NFL reporters talk about practice performance? How is this different? Well, look, we'll talk about practice performance when practices roll around, Kyle, but these aren't practices right now. These are just workouts. And moreover, there's nobody on Oklahoma's roster that's getting paid 7 figures this year, at least not from the collective. Maybe there are some guys that are over that $1 million threshold based on external partnerships, but the collective isn't paying 7 figures to anybody at Oklahoma in 2024. Now, as far as the whole NFL, look, I get what you're saying, and there's some merit to it, but it's not an apples to apples comparison. And it's pretty clear why, right? In the NFL, you're dealing with 25, 30-year-old men. And I get that college kids are adults too, but they're actively transitioning to adulthood, right? Many of them are still teenagers. And I don't think it's fair, and it's not the way I try to conduct myself to treat a 19 or 20-year-old the same way that I would treat a 30-year-old NFL linebacker with 5 years of professional experience under his belt. And I don't think you should, right? I don't think you should regard them in the same light. And so, look, maybe others have different philosophies. I'm not saying you have to agree with me. I'm just saying that's kind of how I operate and always will, because to be honest with you, and I've witnessed this and I can attest to it personally, just having seen guys that have gone through the ringer in this department over and over and over again over the years, is that constant social media scrutiny gets to 19 and 20-year-olds a lot more than it gets to 30-year-olds. So that's where I stand on it. Wow. Somehow I completely forgot about Lewis Carter in that linebacker discussion. That was a critical oversight on my part. I did not mean to do that. Again, Lewis Carter kind of falls in that same camp as Phil Picciotti to me, where it's like there's a lot of promise there. I think he could play, and I think in a world where Stutzman had gone to the NFL, he's due for a significant uptick in snaps. But I think one of the casualties of Stutzman coming back is Lewis Carter's snap count. He played every single game in 2023 for Oklahoma on special teams. He's a good special teamer. I think he will maintain a role with the special teams units. But as far as playing snaps, meaningful ones at linebacker, I just don't know, man. If he does, that means he really popped off in spring ball and fall camp. That means he unseated somebody in the rotation, because rattle off 5 linebackers, right, between McCullough, Stutzman, Canick, Kip Lewis, and Kobe McKenzie, that have all proven to one extent or another that they are deserving of a slot in the rotation. Lewis Carter's going to have to unseat one of those dudes. And so can that happen? Yeah. Am I counting on it? I can't. And it's no knock on him. It's more of a testament to the guys that are in front of him. And once again, the fact that Stutzman came back, it feels miraculous, because very rarely do you get a dude with that type of NFL draft stock, especially at a position like that foregoes the opportunity to go and make 7 figures in the NFL. So it's great that you got him back, but Carter is one of the guys whose snap count is going to be significantly diminished, whose prospective snap count, at least, is going to be significantly diminished by the reality of Stutzman's return. So it is what it is, Jesse. Again, some guys you're just not going to have room to put on the field.
Well, and I mean, that's, again, the whole discussion of the linebacker room changes dramatically if Danny Stutzman isn't in the fold. But yeah, now instead of who are the young guys that are going to step up, now it's about who's going to get some will snaps next to Stutzman, because Stutzman's going to play Stutzman's going to play 95% of snaps at minimum, and it's probably going to be more like 97, 98. Lewis Carter is an interesting name, though, Parker, mostly because I think that cheetah position is going to be interesting to look at. I think they were looking at Phil Pachotti before his injury last year to play some cheetah. I think they're interested in some younger guys like Lewis Carter and Samuel Omasigo at cheetah. We saw Kendall Dolby make an impact at cheetah. Peyton Bowens played some cheetah. Dasan McCullough, obviously. So no, look, the reality is it's hard to remember the name of every single person who deserves to be mentioned in every single position group. But Lewis Carter is a good young player. But yeah, that is, you want veteran guys that have played a ton of snaps and can make an impact. And Danny Stutzman's at the top of the list. But you're right. The one, I don't know if you want to look at it as a downside, but when a veteran gets snaps, that means a young guy doesn't. But this is also the way this is the way that football typically works, is most young guys don't get a ton of snaps until the veterans that are ahead of them are no longer in the program, or you get special young guys that make such an impact that they jump them. But that does not happen too terribly often. It just doesn't.
Now, with that, folks, we are at the 1 hour mark. So we're going to call it a wrap on this installment of OU Insider Live. Again, much more behind the scenes information, easily accessible to you at ouinsider.com for $8 a month. Well worth the investment. If you don't want to take my word for it, go try it out for a month at $9.95. You don't feel like you're getting your money's worth? No hard feelings. But again, I tend to think it'll be worth your investment and you'll end up sticking around. But ouinsider.com is where you can find the work from me, from Brandon Drum, from Jesse, from Brody Lusk, Blake Mullen, and Brian Clinton. The whole squad. We're keeping you in the loop on a day-to-day basis about all things Oklahoma athletics. That is the place to be. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We'll have content coming all throughout the week. In the Paint drops tomorrow. The Oklahoma drill drops tomorrow as well. So there will be content aplenty to keep you all satisfied on the free side. And again, talk about a lot of stuff that we can't necessarily talk about on this platform over at ouinsider.com. Thanks to Manscaped, our sponsor for the evening. Thank you to Jesse for jumping in on short notice in Brandon's stead. We will see you all next week. Same time, same place. This has been OU Insider Live. Take it easy, everybody.